キラークイーン第3の爆弾バイツァーダスト
So don't get me wrong when I say this, but I do like it when a villain wins. There's this fascinating idea that it somehow leads to a darker timeline slash, narrative, honestly. It's just really weird seeing a hero lose, and thanks to what ifs, we can genuinely see what could have happened if a villain did win. And in this case, what about Yoshikage Kira? I personally have to say that Yoshikage Kira is probably the best written villain in all of JoJo's, maybe second only to Funny Valentine in my opinion. But when it comes to realism and just like the actual motivations of a character, Kira's the most realistic, and I think that's what makes him so terrifying if he does win. And sometimes in real life, unlike Kira, serial killers do get away with their crimes some of the time, and they are able to sneak their way back into regular life. So that begs the question, what if Kira could do the same? What if he won? Now, before I get into my 4 scenarios, technically 3.5, about how Kira could possibly win, let me just talk about Kira in general, because I personally have never talked about him in a character slash lore type of sense. Plus, I think I need to reestablish for a few people out there on why this guy was so terrifying to begin with, and if he does win, how big of a threat he would be. Winding the clock back before part 4 began, Kira was doing his whole hand-taking business for about 15 years unseen, taking the lives of apparently up until the ending of part 4, 48 women. That is not counting men, by the way, as I'm going to do a bit of speculation. That number is probably higher, as I'm going to clarify this. Nobody knows that Kira is a serial killer. There has been no evidence before having Killer Queen of him actually committing these crimes, meaning that if anybody actually did speculate on him, he probably got rid of them, as Morio has a suspiciously high disappearance rate. I can guess that it's probably due to Kira. No dur. But the reason he was able to get away with this stuff for so long was because of his nature. Kira, by his nature, is just extremely normal, is the best way I can put it. He was never trying to stand out at first. Eventually later on in part 4, that would be his downfall. We'll get to that. But because of his, I don't know how to really say it, his normal nature, he was basically able to get away with all of these crimes, never being punished for them. Then you throw Killer Queen into the mix, and now he's basically unstoppable. No regular justice system is going to get rid of him. He has no evidence behind him whatsoever. He basically can do what he wants thanks to Killer Queen, as Killer Queen can get rid of all evidence, as he can make anything into a bomb. But I think some people could say him obtaining Killer Queen was probably the start of his downfall, honestly, as it leads into him being more arrogant slash more egotistical, because now he feels like he's the king of the world, as no one can really truly challenge him and thwart his evil desires to get women's hands. But here's the thing, thanks to his ego now with Killer Queen and how he just feels as a person, was his downfall, as I kid you not, in a lot of these scenarios, if Kira was just quiet and never said anything out loud and kept it to himself, he probably would have won. I am not even joking about that. So let's jump into the scenarios. So scenario 1, for a little bit of context here, this is the sheer heart attack fight. So the biggest thing here and the change that's going to occur is that Kira stays this time. And in retrospect of reading this and now explaining this on video, why the does he leave at all during this? Context, previous to this with his fight with Shigeshi, he's literally fighting the kid head on because he knows about his secret and he has to get rid of him, okay? Makes sense, he has to be there in person to defeat Harvest and Shigeshi. So why in this fight does he just leave? Obvious answer, he doesn't want anybody seeing his face or who he actually is. That's a given. And he's pretty confident in the automatic power of sheer heart attack. But even then, why would you go so far away and not actively participate in the fight? Some people who just didn't read the manga very well would say that he can't use the primary bomb, his first bomb, in the fight. Wrong. He literally does it to some people that are trying to, I don't know, rob him or at least, mock him for being weird because of Echo's Act 3. So that's completely wrong. So he can fight. He just walks away for some reason. It's probably due to pride that he walks away. So in this scenario, he doesn't, and he actively participates in the fight. And because of this, he probably does end up winning. Why I say this is more than likely Koichi probably never achieves Echo's Act 3, and even when he did, Kira was able to blitz and one-shot him without using his bombs. And depending on how this hypothetical goes, if he does achieve Act 3 or doesn't, he's still probably going to die somehow to Kira, either through a bomb or through Kira's actual physical involvement in this fight. So I don't think this one is hard to explain, but how do you deal with Jotaro then? Well, just sheer heart attack. Jotaro himself was having an extremely difficult time fighting sheer heart attack during that entire fight. So while Kira fights Koichi, sheer heart attack can fight Jotaro and potentially win. And depending on how fast Kira kills Koichi, Jotaro might have to deal with Kira and sheer heart attack at the same time. Now, of course, there's probably going to be some people in the comment section saying, well, can sheer heart attack recognize friend from foe? Maybe not. It does go on heat signature, but Kira doesn't need to be close in this fight, at least for now, as he can make bombs and throw them at Jotaro, as in the Shigeshi fight, he can literally make bombs out of coins and they can just be removed from his hands and they still operate correctly. So yeah, Jotaro would definitely struggle, and you also have to remember this is the weakest version of Jotaro with time stop, by the way. And for the sake of argument and me using my meta shenanigans rule, where I just, for the sake of the video, I'm going to make Kira win, which I don't think is too far-fetched in this scenario. He just ends up beating them. And since in this fight, Josuke and friends aren't called, nobody knows that it was Yoshikage Kira that killed Koichi and Jotaro, as Kira interrupts that, and definitely would make an effort to stop Koichi from even doing that in the first place, leading to the ending possibility that Kira can still live a peaceful, quiet life without anybody looking over his shoulder trying to find him. That's the best case possibility here. Worst case scenario, as this might not be good for Kira, the Speedwagon Foundation just lost Jotaro Kujo to somebody in Morio. That's a red flag. What the fuck? There's no way the Speedwagon Foundation is just gonna turn a blind eye to this. Somebody just killed the strongest stand user in the world. This is a red alert here, baby. So if I know my timeline correct here with JoJo's, there might be, and I know this is going to be totally crazy saying for a what if video, but there might be a case where Jean-Pierre Polnareff might not be exactly in Italy at this moment, meaning that the Speedwagon Foundation maybe could contact Polnareff, leading into a scenario where Polnareff is going to get revenge for Jotaro and avenge his life, meaning that a Polnareff with the Beetle Arrow could possibly show up in Morio to fight Kira and Killer Queen, if he is able to be reached and contacted for this. Maybe. Like I said, worst case scenario for Kira if Polnareff is not in Italy at the time. Best case scenario, Kira wins and is never caught, and he can still live his peaceful and quiet life being a serial killer. Now, scenario 2 isn't too much crazier. It depends on the way you set it up, but it more or less is just a deviation of scenario 1. Either Kira doesn't participate in the fight but is close by, or still gets his drink but just arrives a lot faster, not letting things hold him back. He still gets his ass beat by Jotaro, but since he does this a lot faster, he wakes up sooner, meaning that Josuke and Okuyasu aren't there to challenge him. So that still means he goes to Cinderella's stand user and gets a face swap, but he probably doesn't get face swap with Kusaku this time around, as he would have to show up later for the exchange to even happen, meaning that Kira would have a completely different identity in this alternative timeline. And if that was the case, he would have never met Hayato, who was the main problem for the later half of part 4 for Kira, meaning that he potentially here could win, as it would be such a drastic change to the story that I don't think I could accurately predict what could possibly happen, as I don't know what identity Kira would take. Best case scenario, he just finds somebody very similar to him with a normal life and just takes it from them, therefore meaning he still gets to live a quiet and peaceful life away from the Morio Warriors, as they would never be able to find Kira again after this, as the trail for him would possibly go cold. Worst case scenario, somebody like Hayato shows up in his life again to ruin him, leading to his eventual defeat, but Hayato was such like a really interesting character that just fucked him over, and seeing that again happen with another person just seems super unlikely to me. So I'd say the best case scenario here still still wins out, meaning that he does win in the end if he was just a bit faster in this second scenario. But I feel like this scenario only correctly happens if there's a bit of meta shenanigans involved, as there were a lot of obstacles in his way to get there in the first place. And on top of that, with the first scenario, we had to make Kira completely ignore his pride so he could fight Jotaro and Koichi. With this second scenario, it's kind of weird. I don't personally like it, as I feel like this first scenario would probably occur a lot more than this one. I think Kira would fight them off pretty well if he's using Sure Heart Attack and Killer Queen at the same time. But if he's not, then yeah, I think maybe scenario 2 would end up occurring, maybe? Depends. So I'm gonna give my thoughts on both of these scenarios and what would probably happen if Kira did win, as the next two scenarios are a lot more drastic and are a lot more different than these previous two and what ends up happening if he does win. Overall, he'd still live a normal life like he did previously, definitely with the first scenario, and the second one requires a new face, but he'd more or less probably in the best case scenario there. I guess in both of these cases, if they're both the best case scenario, he'd still live the same life. But with the second one in specific, he'd just have a different face. He would still go around collecting women's hands for nefarious reasons and would never be caught ever again, as he would probably even do a lower profile in life, never trying to get caught like in the last 15 years or so like he previously did. It would be extremely, and I mean extremely hard for the Morio Warriors to find him again. It was basically by chance and luck they even found him the first time. All I can say for a rough summary is that, yeah, he'll probably just end up killing more women over the years and just being Kira, evil and disgusting and doing all that nasty shit that he regularly does. So yeah, more or less, I guess his best case scenarios or winning scenarios just end up just him being regular Kira, I guess, which is pretty sad in hindsight, because, you know, looking back, a villain winning like him is just really sad for all of Morio. So, moving on to scenario 3. In this scenario, Kira still becomes Kosaku, but the major difference here is he doesn't act weird / with a bit of meta shenanigans. He just acts more normal / cautious around them. Like, he's super low-key here. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, he doesn't stick out or really out of character. And on top of that, this is what I was referencing in the beginning of the video, he doesn't speak out loud and say Yoshikage Kira ever. Okay? Ever. It was so dumb in the anime and manga that he just says this shit out loud. Like, for 15 years, like, nobody discovers you, but the moment you start speaking your name out loud is when you get discovered. Like, really? That is so stupid, but it's whatever. In this scenario, he doesn't do that, revealing himself to Hayato on accident and, like, you know, the whole, I'm gonna probably kill him because he's in my way. He doesn't say any of that stuff. He's like super low-key and super cautious in the scenario. He is trying to, originally, like he actually said, slowly is trying to become Kusaku. And eventually, here's where the what if comes in, he becomes Kusaku. Like, everyone's like, oh, he's just acting slightly weird, but yeah, it's Kosaku. But eventually then evolves it into Kira once again in his own way. Kind of a Kosaku Kira fusion, more proper. The only big problem here would be Hayato, as usual, as this guy's going to be coming up a lot now in the rest of this video. So how do you get around that? Well, more or less, you just kind of flip it on him. Why is an elementary school kid stalking his family with cameras and shit? Like, did no one question that? Like, nobody ever really did on my reread of all of this information and my research gathering. Nobody questioned this child, ever, because nobody found out. But what if they did? Like, you could totally flip that. There's no way in my mind Kira won't be like, dude, you're just a creep, like a giant creep. Because, like, nobody's gonna question him at first. Like, Kosaku's being weird, but, like, it's not really weird. What's wrong about practicing your name again? Or trying to figure out something different with your signature? Like, that's not really weird or really like suspect of him being a murderer or something. Like, that's not weird. And sure, he does have a plant upstairs, but like, Morio itself is weird, and there are a lot of shit that happens in that town, so him having it's not too big of a red flag. It doesn't scream, I'm Yoshikage Kira. It just screams that, like, hey, your kid's stalking you and showing all your secrets. That's kind of fucked up. Like Kira could flip it on its head and kind of like reverse blackmail the child in a way, I guess, if there ever was a confrontation. But if Kira's low-key about it, I don't think this would ever happen in the first place. In a way, maybe Hayato just over time, if Kira does play it correctly and is able to be Kosaku then into Kira / his perfect fusion of the characters, maybe Hayato never realizes it and just kind of accepts him? Maybe? I don't really know if it's possible, but I definitely feel like it was likely. Or maybe at bare minimum just like says, sure, I'll live with the guy maybe, but I'm still going to be suspect around them, possibly. And on top of this, with Kira being a lot more low-key, he probably doesn't go out as killing as much to kind of save face and tries to convince like everybody around him that he is Kosaku now. Whether that's even likely is up for debate, but for the sake of the video, I'll just throw in the, the meta's shenanigans rule. So overall, if he actually did end up winning in this scenario, because Hayato never rats him out to anybody, and nobody becomes suspicious of him, and Rohan never just tries to look into Hayato in general because Hayato isn't suspicious of his father, at least to a very high degree, Kira would most likely live a very similar life to what he lived previously as Kira, but probably a lot more toned down as Kosaku now. But the one major thing here that I can't get around is that 5-year itch he gets where he just has to kill. It's specifically stated in his character bio sheet that he just has to. Like, there's this 5-year itch that he just has to go find hands. It just gets into his system. Might be the problem here and could lead to his downfall, but I feel like maybe through sheer willpower alone, Kira could overcome it, maybe, but I don't really know. That's the one thing that throws a wrench in this scenario. So here comes the 0.5 scenario within this video that is a slight deviation of scenario 3. The one where Kira becomes a family man / is romantically in love with Hayato's mom, kind of. Okay, before I start talking, I'm going to quote Kira so this doesn't sound like I'm going crazy. Quote, was Yoshikage Kira really worrying about some woman? For some reason, I was overwhelmed with relief when I saw her. Her eyes hadn't been struck by the thorns, but why? No, it's just that if something happens to her, it'll make it that much easier for Jotaro Kujo to discover my identity. Do I really want to protect this woman out of devotion? That's why I wasn't relieved she was hurt. End quote. So with this quote, this interaction during the Stray Cat fight, it really makes me think that there could be a prisoner of love scenario happening here. But he's spending so much time with a family that Kira could genuinely end up loving Hayato's mom for whatever reason. Could be for a lot of things. Prisoner of love scenarios happen surprisingly a lot more than you think in real life. So Kira here, it could possibly be the same thing. No, it doesn't really change anything from scenario 3, but it becomes more realistic that he becomes a family man in this case that genuinely wants to be a part of a woman's life, not for her hands. No, they'd probably have some weird ass romantic fantasies. I'm just saying that Kira would probably be a freak in the sheets, but I ain't going there, bro. But yeah, it's not too much of a deviation from like scenario 3 other than him actually liking Hayato's mom. If anything, it makes it a motivating factor for Kira to change, maybe? I don't know. So moving on to our final scenario, scenario 4, which takes place during the Bites the Dust arc. This happens at the very end of the last time loop, and the only change here that I need to change, no character development, no messing with Hayato, it's one thing needs to change, and Kira wins, and he literally can be exactly like his first showing, like that suave, normal character with this drive thanks to Killer Queen. All he has to do here is not say his name, allowing fate to play out, killing Rohan and all the Moria warriors, and simply like he said to Hayato earlier, he disactivates Killer Queen Bites the Dust, making the Moria warriors' deaths permanent and then reactivating it on Hayato once again, permanently placing it on the child, making his one greatest enemy in all of Morio under his control, never to utter that his father is a serial killer. This is by far the best scenario out of all of them. Sure, he doesn't have Killer Queen anymore, but he was a serial killer for 15 years before he had Killer Queen, or at least a majority of that time he didn't have Killer Queen, and still got rid of evidence and was never suspected of murder. Now he can just do it again that way without Killer Queen, as now Killer Queen is in the possession of Hayato, as now he is being constantly looked over by Bites the Dust, as he now can roam freely over Morio, doing whatever he wants now, choosing any woman's hand to take off their body as he chooses, being this dark king of Morio, always in the background, preying on the innocent and weak. While I always dog on Bites the Dust being weak as an actual stand ability in a combat scenario, when it's in its scenario that it's perfect for, it's basically unbeatable unless Yoshikage Kira says his name out loud like a idiot. And no one would suspect Kosaku of being a murderer anyway in this scenario, as there would be literally no evidence leading back to him now, as the people that did have evidence are gone now. So he's basically able to live a free and peaceful life once again. So yeah, that's gonna be the end of the video. I'm gonna leave it on a dark note. This is a dark episode on what if here on my channel. Jeez, the next one I do gotta be like optimistic and hopeful. Like this is sad. All of Morio's over now because of me. Oh no. Poor people, I'm so sorry. Well, I don't really know what to say here. Kira won. I guess I'll say what was your favorite scenario in this video, and comment what your favorite was, or if you have actually your own, throw them in the comment section. I'd love to hear them. But I think I'm just gonna say my outro now. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, stay hydrated. See you in the next one, ladies and gentlemen. It's so bleak to end it off like this. What the hell?